At 5:12 local time in the northern Arabian Sea, the water is smooth, the wind is light, and visibility is crystal clear. USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced aircraft carrier ever built, moves steadily across the open sea at 18 knots. From far away, she seems almost still, a 100,000-ton fortress of steel gliding silently through deep blue water. On the flight deck, the morning routine is just getting underway. Deck crews weave between parked FA-18 Super Hornets, locking down equipment and preparing the day's first patrol launch. But beneath the deck, that calm is already beginning to fade. Inside the Combat Information Center, the radar wall pulses with the steady rhythm of a carrier strike group underway. Green sweeps circle across the displays. Dozens of contacts drift over the digital map. Commercial routes, distant cargo ships, fishing boats scattered across the horizon. Then a new contact appears, bearing 041, range 28 nautical miles. One radar operator leans closer to the console. New surface contact. A second mark appears behind it, then a third. 3 ships, tight formation. Speed, 60 knots. That would be normal for routine naval traffic, but their heading draws immediate attention. All 3 vessels are moving straight toward the strike group. The system starts cross-checking hull signatures. Seconds later, the identification appears on the screen. Iranian Navy. Inside CIC, nobody needs to raise their voice. The officer of the watch marks the track. Surface group, 3 contacts. Iranian naval units. Bearing steady. Up on the bridge, the data moves instantly through the ship's network. Outside, the scene remains unchanged. The sea is calm. The carrier holds course. But inside the ship, every sensor is now fixed on those 3 contacts. At 5:14, the radar updates again. Speed increase. The Iranian ships accelerate from 16 knots to 21, then 24. Their formation tightens. Instead of drifting wider, the 3 vessels pull closer together, forming a shallow triangle as they close in. One CIC supervisor studies the display carefully. Course unchanged. They are still coming directly in. At 22 nautical miles, the strike group begins the first step of standard maritime procedure, a radio hail. The message goes out across open frequencies. Iranian naval vessels approaching United States carrier strike group. This is U.S. Navy warship operating in international waters. Alter course immediately and maintain safe distance. The transmission carries out over the sea. No reply. The Iranian ships continue forward. On radar, their speed jumps again, 27 knots. That is no longer patrol speed. That is intercept speed. Inside CIC, the watch team shifts posture without a single shouted command. Data windows expand across the displays. Long-range optics turn toward the incoming vessels. Electronic warfare sensors begin recording emissions. At 5:16, the range drops to 19 miles. Then operators notice something new. One of the Iranian ships has activated its surface search radar. The signal appears on the electronic warfare display like a thin ribbon of static. They're painting us. The words move quietly through the room. Painting means scanning, measuring range, speed, and heading, building targeting data. The officer of the watch gives a single nod. Log it. Above CIC, the bridge stays composed. The captain stands behind the forward windows, binoculars raised toward the horizon. At this distance, the Iranian ships are still out of sight, hidden beyond the curve of the Earth. But the ship's sensors miss nothing. At 5:17, the Iranian vessels push even harder, 30 knots. For ships of that size, that is maximum power. The triangular formation sharpens. All 3 hulls angle slightly inward toward the center of the strike group. This is no longer routine shadowing. This is direct pressure. Then, inside the Combat Information Center, a new signal spikes across the electronic warfare display. Different radar, stronger, narrower beam. The technician leans in. Fire control radar detected. That changes everything. Search radar observes. Fire control radar locks in. The room goes still. The officer of the watch checks the range counter. 16 nautical miles, closing fast. He reaches for the intercom. Bridge, CIC. Iranian surface group has activated fire control radar. A brief pause follows. Then the captain's voice comes back calm and steady. Understood. The carrier strike group immediately shifts into a higher defensive posture. On the flight deck above, deck crews move faster around the waiting fighters. A Seahawk helicopter spins up, its rotors coming alive. Inside CIC, another radar operator suddenly calls out. Launch tubes opening. The screen confirms it. Infrared sensors catch 3 sharp flashes of heat erupting from the decks of the Iranian warships. For a split second, the contacts are only bright signatures. Then the flight paths appear. 3 missiles, sea skimming, heading directly for the strike group. The operator reacts instantly, vampires inbound, and in that instant, the quiet calm of the Arabian Sea is gone. Beyond the horizon, 3 Iranian missiles are now racing toward the most powerful aircraft carrier on Earth. At 5:19 local time, 3 missile tracks streak across the radar displays inside USS Gerald R. Ford's Combat Information Center. Thin red vectors cut across the digital ocean map, fast and low, sea skimming profile. Speed just under Mach 1. The officer of the watch responds without hesitation. Confirmed tracks. The radar operator nods. 3 hostile missiles, bearing 041, range 14 miles. Flying barely 30 feet above the waves, the missiles are designed to disappear into the radar clutter of the ocean's surface. The strategy is simple. Stay low, stay fast, and leave the defender almost no time to react. But the carrier strike group has already detected them. High above the carrier, an E-2D Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft catches the launch signatures moments after ignition. Its radar sweeps hundreds of miles across the sea, feeding targeting data straight into the Aegis Combat Network, protecting the fleet. Inside CIC, intercept calculations begin instantly. Time to impact, 90 seconds. The destroyer screen reacts before anyone on the carrier can see the missiles for themselves. 8 miles ahead of the carrier, USS Arleigh Burke shifts from patrol posture to full defensive engagement. Deep inside the ship, the vertical launch system unlocks. Metal hatches slide open along the forward deck. A command moves across the tactical network. Engage. 2 SM-2 Standard missiles ignite inside their launch cells. From the carrier's bridge, sailors watch twin columns of flame burst from the destroyer's bow as the interceptors leap skyward. For a moment, they climb nearly straight up, white contrails carving lines through the early morning sky. Then they roll and dive, guided by shared radar data from across the strike group's network. They race toward the incoming tracks. Inside CIC, the countdown begins, SM-2 away. The first interceptor meets an Iranian missile 15,000 feet above the ocean. On radar, the hit appears as a sudden burst of static. 1 track disappears, but 2 remain. The surviving missiles adjust automatically, dropping even tighter to the ocean's surface. At that altitude, the curvature of the Earth hides them from long-range radar until the very last moment. Range, 8 miles. Impact in 40 seconds. The strike group's layered defense shifts to the next line. Another destroyer in the screen, USS Mason, locks onto the 2 remaining missiles. ESSM ready. The evolved Sea Sparrow missiles were built for exactly this kind of moment. Fast, agile interceptors meant to destroy threats that break through the outer defensive ring. 2 more launch cells flare open. Twin interceptors surge away from the destroyer, leaving twisting white vapor trails behind them. Inside CIC, the radar operator follows the closing geometry. Intercept in 5, 4, 3. A flash blooms across the radar scope. 1 more missile disappears. At 5:25 local time, only 1 hostile track is left. Then the numbers start collapsing fast. Range, 4 miles. Time to impact, 15 seconds. The final missile is flying only meters above the waves, its seeker fixed on the carrier's massive radar signature. At that distance, the destroyers no longer have enough room to stop it. The outer shield is gone. Now the last barrier is the carrier itself. On the forward section of USS Gerald R. Ford, the Phalanx close-in weapon system snaps to life. The white dome above the superstructure turns toward the incoming threat. Inside the mount, the 6-barrel 20mm Gatling gun spins up with a rising mechanical whine. Target lock. Range, 1,500 yards. Then it fires. The sound is impossible to miss, a harsh metallic thunder as thousands of rounds per minute tear into the morning air. From the flight deck, sailors watch a line of tracer fire blaze across the sea like a stream of light. The missile enters that wall of fire. For a fraction of a second, it keeps coming. Then it breaks apart in a violent burst of flame barely 1,000 yards from the carrier's bow. Shards of debris scatter across the water and vanish harmlessly into the sea. The final missile is gone. Inside CIC, 1 radar operator finally exhales. All 3 targets neutralized, but the relief lasts only a moment. Because the radar picture changes again. The 3 Iranian warships are still closing, and this time the infrared sensors catch something even worse. New heat signatures bloom across their decks. Their launch rails are opening again. The officer of the watch leans toward the display. Another volley. 3 fresh signatures ignite almost at once. 3 more missiles leap from the Iranian ships, their rocket motors burning bright as they rise briefly before dropping back down toward the ocean surface. The radar operator calls it immediately. Second wave inbound. Across the carrier strike group, alarms sound again. And this time, everyone understands exactly what this is. Not a warning, a real fight. At 5:21 local time, the second wave appears on radar before the smoke from the first intercept has even faded into the horizon. 3 new missile tracks, sea skimming, closing fast. Inside the Combat Information Center aboard USS Gerald R. Ford, the digital map flashes red again as the incoming vectors update in real time. Range 16 nautical miles. Time to impact just over 1 minute. But now the carrier strike group is already ahead of the threat. High above the fleet, two FA-18 Super Hornets are flying a combat air patrol pattern. They launched only minutes earlier for routine overwatch, but their mission changes instantly. The lead pilot hears the call through his headset. Vampires inbound, multiple, Vector 042. His radar lights up with three small returns racing toward the strike group. But behind them, something else appears. A faint airborne contact, higher altitude, slower speed. The weapons officer aboard the E-2D Hawkeye identifies it first. Iranian targeting drone. The small aircraft is flying several thousand feet above the missile path, acting as a relay. From that height, it can track the carrier's radar signature and pass course corrections to the incoming missiles. Without it, those missiles lose their eyes. Inside the Super Hornet cockpit, the pilot reacts at once. Contact confirmed. He banks hard right, drops lower, and accelerates toward the drone. Speed surges past 500 knots. Below him, the sea flashes by in streaks of deep blue and white foam. His wingman stays tight behind him. Back inside CIC, the fleet's defense network continues calculating intercept solutions. Destroyers prepare their launch cells again, but the air wing is already moving first. The Super Hornet's radar locks onto the drone. Distance, 18 miles. The pilot arms his weapon, AIM-120 selected. The drone continues its steady orbit above the missile tracks, unaware that a fighter is already closing on it. The pilot squeezes the trigger. Fox 3. The AIM-120. AMRAAM launches from the fighter's wing in a burst of flame, then rockets forward and climbs rapidly toward the higher target. A few seconds later, the radar return disappears. The Iranian drone breaks apart high above the sea. Inside CIC, the tactical display updates instantly. The incoming missiles lose mid-course guidance. Without the drone feeding them corrections, their paths begin to drift. One veers several degrees off course, another starts wobbling slightly above the waves, but they are still dangerous. At sea-skimming height, even a missile without stable guidance can still cause devastating damage if it reaches the carrier. The destroyers fire again. Two ESSM interceptors launch from USS Mason and race toward the drifting targets. The first Iranian missile is destroyed 6 miles from the carrier. The second vanishes seconds later in a bright flash above the ocean. Only one remains, but now its path is unstable, weaving left and right as its seeker struggles to lock back onto the carrier's radar profile. Inside the second Super Hornet, the wingman picks up the remaining track visually. I've got visual. He pushes the throttles forward. The jet surges ahead. Altitude drops to just 200 feet above the waves. He slides in behind the missile, closing fast. From the cockpit, it looks like a white spear tearing across the sea. The pilot steadies the jet and selects his weapon, Sidewinder. The AIM-9X lock tone chirps in his headset as the infrared seeker catches the hot engine plume of the missile. He fires. The Sidewinder jumps forward. 5 seconds later, it slams into the Iranian missile. The blast erupts just above the water, scattering fragments across the ocean surface. All 3 missiles from the second volley are gone. Inside CIC, the radar picture clears once again. But now the operators are focused on something even more serious. The 3 Iranian warships are still charging in. Distance 13 miles, speed 31 knots, and their launch rails are still hot. The carrier strike group has stopped 2 complete missile salvos, but the danger is far from over. High above the fleet, the 2 Super Hornets bank sharply and circle back toward the Iranian ships. From this altitude, the pilots can finally see them clearly now. 3 gray hulls cutting through the water at full speed, smoke trails still rising from their launchers. Inside CIC, the captain's voice comes over the command network. Enough. The defensive posture changes immediately. Up to this point, the strike group has been fighting to survive the attack. Now the mission changes. The order is clear. Neutralize the launch platforms. The Super Hornet pilots roll into a steep descent and accelerate toward the Iranian warships below. For the first time since the missiles appeared, the battle is no longer only about defense. Now it is about striking back. At 5:25 local time, the 2 FA-18 Super Hornets break from their holding pattern and drop toward the ocean. Altitude drops fast, 5,000 feet, 3,000, 1,000. Below, the Arabian Sea stretches endlessly, calm and almost unreal in its silence. But ahead, 3 Iranian warships slice through the water, leaving aggressive wakes as they continue pushing toward the carrier strike group at full speed. Inside the lead Super Hornet, the targeting display locks in. 3 surface contacts, range 12 miles. The pilot banks slightly left, giving the radar a clean angle. Instantly, the system paints the targets. Each ship appears as a sharp, defined shape against the shifting background of the sea. Behind him, the wingman confirms. 3 contacts locked. Back on USS Gerald R. Ford, the command moves through the encrypted network, neutralize the launch platforms, no hesitation. Inside the cockpit, the weapons panel lights up, a GM-84 Harpoon selected. This is exactly what it was built for, a sea-skimming, radar-guided missile designed to strike before the target even knows it's coming. The pilot steadies the aircraft. Speed, 540 knots. Altitude, 300 feet. At that height, the jet is barely above the water. The ocean rushes beneath the canopy in a blur. Range drops fast. 9 miles. 8. 7. The radar locks onto the lead Iranian warship, the one that launched the first volley. The targeting box goes solid. The pilot fires. Fox. A harpoon drops cleanly from the wing, then ignites a split second later. Its engine kicks in, driving it forward just above the sea. Almost immediately, it drops even lower, barely 20 feet above the water, its seeker locking onto the ship's hull. The Super Hornet breaks hard away. Behind him, the wingman lines up, second harpoon away. Now 2 missiles race across the surface, nearly invisible against the ocean. On the Iranian ships, the warning comes too late. The lead vessel's radar catches the incoming threat for a moment, but at that altitude, there's almost no time to react. Crew members turn toward the horizon, and then impact. The first harpoon slams into the starboard side of the lead warship just above the waterline. The blast rips through the hull with devastating force. A massive fireball erupts as the warhead detonates inside the ship. Flames surge upward. The vessel immediately begins to list, smoke pouring from shattered structures. 3 seconds later, the second missile hits. It strikes the second warship near its aft launcher. The detonation triggers fuel and onboard systems. The rear section of the ship disappears in a violent explosion, sending fire and thick black smoke into the sky. The shockwave ripples across the water. Inside the cockpit, the pilot glances down. 2 ships burning, but the third is still moving. Instead of stopping, it turns sharply to port, engines pushing harder as it tries to escape. Speed climbs past 30 knots. Back inside CIC, radar operators track the maneuver. Third vessel altering course, but it's already too late. Above the water, an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter has moved into position. Its sensors lock onto the fleeing ship, feeding precise targeting data into the strike group's network. Seconds later, another response follows. From the forward deck of USS Mason, a launch cell opens. A missile erupts upward in a column of flame. For a moment, it climbs almost vertically, then tilts forward and accelerates toward the horizon. Guided by the Seahawk's data, it races across the sea. Below, the Iranian warship continues its desperate turn, trying to outrun what's already on the way. It can't. Less than 30 seconds later, the missile reaches it. The impact is overwhelming. The strike hits near the center of the ship, detonating deep inside. A powerful explosion tears upward through the deck. Fire bursts into the air as thick smoke spreads across the surface of the sea. Within moments, the ship loses speed, then stops. High above, the 2 Super Hornets circle back. Below them, the result is clear. 3 Iranian warships disabled, 2 heavily on fire, the third drifting, motionless. The attack that began minutes earlier ends in near silence, broken only by the sound of flames consuming what remains. But inside the carrier strike group, there is no celebration. Because the objective was never victory. The objective was control. And now, once again, the sea is under that control. At 5:28 local time, the explosions fade across the Arabian Sea. 3 columns of smoke rise slowly into the morning sky. Burning debris floats between damaged hulls. The ocean begins to smooth out again as if nothing had happened. From 10,000 feet above, the Super Hornets continue wide circles over the area. Through their targeting systems, the pilots study the scene. One ship is heavily tilted, flames pouring from its deck. Another is broken near the stern, its structure collapsed into twisted metal. The third sits still, smoke rising through the center of the hull. Inside the lead cockpit, the pilot transmits calmly. 3 targets neutralized. Back aboard USS Gerald R. Ford, the update reaches CIC within seconds. Radar confirms it. All 3 hostile surface contacts have stopped. Speed, 0 knots. No emissions. No new activity. The officer of the watch gives a single nod. Threat eliminated. Across the carrier strike group, the tension that filled every space over the past 15 minutes begins to ease. Systems remain active. Crews stay focused. But the immediate danger has passed. But the fleet doesn't ease up. Standard post-engagement procedures begin immediately. High above the strike group, the E-2D Hawkeye continues sweeping the horizon, its radar scanning for any new aircraft or surface contacts. Nothing appears. Electronic warfare systems monitor the spectrum for activity. Silence. No additional signals. On the carrier's flight deck, another MH-60R Seahawk lifts off. Its rotors cut through the ocean air as it heads toward the damaged ships to document what's left behind. The crew activates their systems. Infrared cameras capture the fires still burning across the vessels. High-resolution optics zoom in on shattered decks and twisted structures. Every frame is time-stamped, geolocated, and transmitted back to the strike group's intelligence network. In modern naval operations, proof matters almost as much as action. Back on the bridge, the captain lowers his binoculars. In the distance, faint columns of smoke rise above the horizon. The entire engagement lasted less than 15 minutes. 3 missile waves. 3 launch platforms disabled. He speaks calmly into the command circuit. Log the engagement. Inside CIC, everything is recorded with precision. The first launch time, intercept sequences, air wing response, final neutralization. Every second captured, every radar track stored. Nothing is left to memory. Above the sea, the Super Hornets make one final pass over the disabled ships before turning back toward the fleet. Their engines echo across the sky as they accelerate home. Within minutes, the flight deck of USS Gerald R. Ford comes into view, a massive runway floating in open water. One by one, the fighters land, catching the arresting cables and rolling to a controlled stop. Deck crews move quickly, guiding each jet into position. Engines power down. Pilots climb out, helmets in hand. No cheering, no celebration, just quiet, controlled professionalism. Because for everyone on board, this isn't about victory. It's about understanding what just happened. An aircraft carrier is never alone. USS Gerald R. Ford may be the largest warship ever built, but its strength comes from everything around it. Destroyers equipped with layered missile defenses, airborne radar platforms watching hundreds of miles in every direction, strike fighters capable of reaching targets far beyond the horizon, satellites and sensors feeding constant data into a single coordinated system. When those 3 warships launched their missiles, they weren't targeting one ship. They were facing an entire network, and that network responds. The Seahawk helicopter makes one last orbit above the damaged vessels before turning back toward the carrier. Behind it, the 3 ships drift in silence, smoke slowly fading into the open sky. Inside the strike group, operations continue as if nothing happened. Jets refuel, radar keeps scanning, sailors return to their stations. Out here, far from any coastline, the mission doesn't pause. The ocean may look calm again, but everyone on board understands the reality. At any moment, something new can appear on the horizon, and when it does, the fleet will be ready.